You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. Welcome back. We conclude this edition of Encore with part 3 of Equitable Policing during the coronavirus pandemic, where the panelists answer questions from attendees. And now for part 3 of Equitable Policing during the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, and I think this conversation is really surfacing, not that it needs to be surfaced because it's very obvious, this rift and this lack of trust that is, centuries old. And so one of the questions that we have here is going to Chief Balling about how has the COVID virus hampered our ability to have the much needed conversations on police improvements and how we can overcome these obstacles to build trust and understanding. Certainly the things that we're talking about here are not helping that conversation.
With the COVID situation, a lot of departments have cut back on their community service programs. With the fear of spreading of the COVID disease, with the fear of interaction, at least through the state of Ohio, a lot of the programs that we normally would, the meet and greets, the safety town, citizen academies has been delayed. So that has hampered a lot of our normal interaction on a non-police law enforcement purpose. I think that the COVID situation has created some of the barriers and non-conversations that we normally would have. I'll use our own town for example. We had some very peaceful demonstrators that just wanted to come out and make their point, have their voices heard. We went out there with law enforcement in masks and walked with them around our court square and talked with them. And we wanted to have a larger conversations, but due to COVID limitations of getting together with groups, we wasn't able to have that. And as we said here, part of the learning process is learning what each other's thinking, not assuming our way is correct or somebody else's way is correct, is having those conversations. So what we started doing is forming smaller groups of how we could proceed and build upon these conversations once we can return to normal, to get ideals, to get functions on how to proceed and what information needs to be out there. And that's one of the things that I found out. People just wanted the information, whether it was number of traffic stops, number of field identifications, how we decide on who we stop and don't. So right now, I would give people advice on law enforcement is to continue to keep having those conversations, but try to identify what information people need to make their own informed decisions and not go into it with your mind made up that it's one way or another from both sides. So I think that's how it got hampered and not.
Thank you for that, Chief. We have a question, one thing I do want to raise that I've seen, and we've seen this in education, certainly, and we're talking about equitable policing, but a lot of community meetings have gone to Zoom and Wi-Fi and things of that nature, which, a lot of our communities do not have, and the communities who need to probably communicate with the police the most. Again, it just goes back to a lot of the systemic issues that we've got to deal with. So there's another question here. This one is from Bonnie Watt. Officer Sabota, this one's for you. How strong do you try to instill in the trainees about the importance of discretion and patience?
Thank you for that question. Nobody calls the police to say, hey, I'm having a good day, I'm having a baby, I got a new car. People call the police because there's a serious issue. Probably a law has been broken. So, we try to train in the academy, and we train them to say, every call is different. And it's very important, maybe you got into a confrontation, maybe you had to deal with some very serious issues on that last call. But we're training officers to have patience. That next call may and probably will not be the same scenario for the next one. The next call, the next several calls, you will have to have more maybe patience, compassion, and listen to what's going on. And I try to train officers. That next call for service, act like they're your loved ones, your family members, your brothers, your sisters, and try to have compassion and understand. It's obvious, if the situation has become very violent or bad, or they're breaking the law, or if public safety is in jeopardy, of course you have to detain them and determine what your plan of action is going to be. But our training is patience, common sense, good judgment, and follow our policies. We have a chief here in Houston and the command staff. They're very good, and we have rewrote a lot of the policies that reflects a positive image of our police department for several years, and it has worked out. Of course, every situation is not perfect. I can't sit here and say that our internal affairs don't get complaints from time to time, but I think our training in the past 5 to 6 years has really improved, where we have to train officers, and that may be a beat officer that's been in that same beat or that same station for 30 years. It's a different time. 2020 is a total different time now that we have to really service the public. And I think some officers forget that, we're public servants. So we really have to make sure that the officers are aware of it. And don't forget it.
Thank you for that, Officer Sabota. So we have been joined by Eric Adams, president of the Brooklyn, New York Bureau. And he comes to us with a very unique perspective. He's been both officer and now politician. And so we definitely want to bring him into this conversation. Welcome, Mr. President. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I could. And please feel free to call me Eric. That's what my mama named me, and I just love that name.
Oh, you just made it hard, because I was about to say, well, you earned that president name, but you got your mama into it, so now I gotta call you Eric. Well, thank you, and welcome. We're so glad to have you. Just to give you a bit of context, so we really have been having a conversation today about the role of police, and they're put in a position. They're given the order, and in a paramilitary organization, they go and follow through. And whether they really should be in a situation of enforcing public health orders, telling people to stay home, breaking up basketball games, breaking up barbecues. We've also talked about how it's been enforced in certain areas in a disparate way, where, you have African Americans, getting more citations, getting arrested, and having higher bails. And so that's what we've been talking about for the last about hour. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, having been on both sides, and I've worked for a mayor, and then I went over and worked for a police commissioner, and the pressures in both of those roles manifest very differently. And so talk to us about, this idea of the police, what I used to hear all the time, ma'am, we're just doing what we're told, which often came from the politician's office. How do you balance that? And what's the advice for police officers that find themselves in very difficult positions and trying to manage this situation?
Thank you. A lot was in that question
Yes.
to really pick apart, and so probably we'll just address it in layers as the conversation continues. First, there's another aspect of my evolution to where I am now as the Brooklyn Borough president. Is that I was arrested as a child, and I was beat bad by police officers, my brothers and I. And, for the first part of my young upbringing, there was nothing I wanted to do around police. For the most part, what I thought was the symbol of safety was really crushed and destroyed. And it wasn't until a group of civil rights leaders asked me and 12 other young men to go into law enforcement to fight from within, after a businessman named Arthur Miller was killed through a chokehold, and a young man named Randolph Evans was shot by a police officer. And I reluctantly did, and I went in, and started an organization of 100 Blacks in law enforcement who care. We were a civil rights organization within the police department. So I think it's important to get that context to understand this, who I am as a person and why this conversation is so important to me. Policing is a noble profession. And I don't think there is a greater level of individuals who are willing to put on a bulletproof vest and stand on street corners and run towards gunshots and save the lives of people. For the most part, they don't know. But the reality is that those of us who are in the profession did not hold up the nobility of that profession by allowing individuals who are not suitable to be of this noble profession to be among us. We have been silent. And when I say we, many of the advocates and the groups in policing, we were silent when Abner Louima was shot 44 times, or when Diallo was shot at 44 times, and Adam Louima was sodomized. And we had cops in New York who were part of the Dirty 30. They used to rob drug dealers and then sell the drug proceeds, the 77 Mark Boys. We should have been spending our time of saying, if you want to be among us and part of us, then you must reach the level of nobility that this profession brings. And we didn't do a good job in doing that. And then on the other half is society on the whole. I think Jack Nicholson's quote in A Few Good Men of "You really don't want to know the truth." Let's be clear. Society from all over this country, all big cities and even smaller cities, we tell police, go out and do your job. And we really don't want to know how you're carrying out that job. We're addicted to 911. We call police for everything and anything. And then when it's time to critique their interaction, we look back over it and say, why did you handle it in that way? And I think that's a big mistake that we're doing in society. And we need to think differently about the ecosystem of public safety. Lastly, we need to understand how one's brain operate. The officer mentioned, and I thought it was so important, you don't call the police to invite them to the birthday party. You call them when the party was shot up. If every encounter our police departments are receiving is a negative encounter, their brains, neurologists would tell you, their brains begins to define the communities they're policing as a ball of chaos and negativism. I'll never forget when I was training a rookie police officer and I was a lieutenant, we walked into one of our public housing developments and someone urinated in the elevator. And he said, you see, Lou, these people don't deserve anything. They urinate in the elevator. They do all these terrible things to where they live. And I told the young officer, I said, one person urinated in the elevator. Everyone in this building is upset about that. But if you define the people of that building based on the actions of one or two people, then you believe that they're not deserving of the policing that you would give to your own family members. We have to change how we train police, how they interact in the communities that they're policing, and then we need to diversify our departments and make sure that people are part of the communities that they are making safe in the first place.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that. I wish you were on here the whole time. You would added quite a bit to this conversation. I have gotten my my notice actually to start wrapping up a little bit. So I'm going to start in the line, and then I'm gonna come back to you, Mr. President Eric, to give us some final words at the end. So, Professor, can I start with you on any final thoughts that you have about the subject matter, and certainly anything that we didn't hit. We only had 45 minutes on such a tough topic, but yes, any final words?
Well, thank you. And you've done a great job. Thank you for moderating this. But I would like to echo some of the things that Eric said, if I can say Eric also. he has said that we need to re-examine the ecology of public safety, and that is so true. We need to start thinking a little bigger about what it means to be safe. We focus on violent crime, murder, people breaking into your home. The reality is that that's really only about 4% of what police do. And so, but there's lots of ways that we in our community are in danger, from cigarette smoke to speeding to people texting and driving, all these things that we don't pay very much attention to or don't count as public safety, but there's a lot more people being harmed by them. And so I think as a society, we need to think broader. I also think my takeaway from this discussion is that the defund the police and the police that we're talking to are a lot closer than I thought. The defund the police want to move some resources around to give the people who are actually trained to deal with public order and mental health and drug addiction the resources to do that. And it sounds like we're in agreement that that needs to be done. And so we can let the police deal with that smaller segment of violent crime that's out there that needs to be addressed. Obviously, there's lots of other things that need to be done, but I actually come away from this discussion hopeful that maybe we're a little closer than I thought.
Great, thank you. Oh, am I muted? No. Thank you so much for that, Professor. And I think that that's why these conversations are so important. And we often assume that we're so far on the different ends of the spectrum that we can't find some middle ground. And so I really thank you for that and all the work that you have done on behalf of the citizens in your city and all, of course, all the great things you're teaching to your students. Let's come to you, Judge Hart, for any final thoughts or words.
Well, let me say this, since I'm Deputy Police Commissioner NYPD, I will call Eric Adams Mr. Borough President, because that's what we do. And I agree with everything that he said. I think that, and he does have a unique perspective in policing. The one thing I would add, though, is it's something that I hearkened to, in the earlier part of our discussion was, it would be, in New York City, we have so many, not talking about the advocacy groups, but the people who run New York City, the mayor, the city council, the politicians, it would be helpful if everybody would come to like a consensus. Case in point, every time, if it's a defund movement or it's other things going on in the city council, there's all this division or whatever, and then the police kind of like get caught, what are we supposed to be doing? So again, I think that's part of the discussion and it's part of the solution, that I think the police sometimes feel that it's us against them. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, Mr. Board President, but the police certainly get that feeling sometimes, and it makes it difficult for them just as a human being to do what they think is best. Not to say that they shouldn't be doing their best all the time, but I think that with all the rhetoric, there was talk about the press and whatever, all that stuff, police officers as individuals are hearing all this stuff. They walk into a situation, what are we supposed to do? You don't want us to do the enforce wearing a mask. You don't want us to do social distancing. You don't want us to do this. I think that policymakers, not only within the police department, but across any government, I think it would be helpful if there were clear messages coming from elected and appointed leaders.
Yeah, Your Honor, Deputy Commissioner, I 100% agree with you. And one of the things that we didn't get to talk about today, but I think is really important, we have had the highest number of deaths among police officers, this year because of COVID, number one, because they are frontline, they don't get to stay in an office. They have to go out and do the things that they're told, number one. Number two, just in the past couple of weeks, the departments that I've worked with, I've heard about officers killing themselves. The suicides are up. One hung himself. And so again, I think that it's so important that the politicians, because they really are the ones with the power and the influence, take into consideration the human beings, to what Eric said, the way that just how policing affects you mentally, physically, and then when you are hated just because of the uniform that you wear, whether you're a person that got up every morning and just came out to serve and protect, also knowing that you could be taking home a deadly disease to your loved ones. All of those things, to the best of a human being, are difficult to juggle. And so I think that we definitely need to take more time to not have, as someone said, police officers be a political football, because I've seen that way too often. So I'm going to come to you, Officer Sabota, and ask you if you have any final words on either officer wellness and how you can take care of yourself, or this issue that we've discussed today about equitable policing in the time of COVID. You're on mute. Mute. Mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for letting me respond on this. I'd like to agree with everybody on this panel. I can truly, sitting here processing everything. Of course, Eric, the judge, the professor, everybody has a lot of experience just by listening to you, and everybody has some very important input on this. One thing I'd like to just remind everybody and just kind of tell everybody what we're doing here in Houston. Community service is very important. Now, 20 years ago when I was on the street, the old police term, cuffing and stuffing. Well, I never thought I'd be here on this panel today talking about this. We all have learned so much. Now, one thing about community service, the stakeholders in the communities, every single community is important, no matter what skin color you are, how much money you have. We have learned that through these meetings, we go out to the community. They come to us every other month, and we listen to everybody, whether you're a grandmother, whether you're a single mom, whether you're a 16 or 18-year-old student that has experienced maybe some negative things, some positive things. It's very important to listen to everybody and to process this. And something that maybe we have learned. Now, in some cases, it's maybe somebody doesn't understand the process of us being police officers, of us running calls for service. And I think somebody had mentioned, 911. Yes, most officers, when they're in a car and they're running calls for service, they respond to what our dispatcher sends us to. And somebody in that community called us. But again, training is very important, and just remember that we're dealing with human beings, and we listen to them. And of course, some of the advocates from every single neighborhood has come to us with problems, and some of them have been angry. When they're in waiting rooms and they come in, they're pounding their hands on the desk wanting change. But a lot of them, once we deal with them and we take action and listen to it and work with them in a positive way, we just don't tell them, well, that's just the way it's going to be, and that's our policy, and you just go back to your neighborhood. We never do that. We come to common grounds. And what's amazing is some of these advocates that they weren't happy with police service. Once we worked out things together, they end up being some of our board of directors in these community service as board members. And they have gone back to their communities and said, we learned a lot, whether that community learned a lot, or the police has learned more about the community, or something that maybe needs to be addressed.
Yes.
So, and Houston is a very diverse, we're getting every culture. They say we're right at 2.3 million. And of course, I know in New York, you have much more, and some of the other cities you may have less. But we're right at over 5,000 police officers, and it's amazing to hear maybe in New York you have tens of thousands of officers. But I'm born and raised in Houston. I'm seeing a very positive change. And I think I told you a week ago that, growing up as a kid here in Houston, when you waved at a police officer, they never waved back. It just wasn't good. But I said someday I'm going to become a police officer and change that, along with the thousands of other police officers that are currently working now with the Houston Police Department. But again, training, having a good chief and a command staff, and having great citizens that understand. And lastly, I'd like to say, in the past several months, where police brutality and the way that the media is projecting a lot of it, I'm really shocked that when I go out in the public and get out of my car, and I'm having a lot of people, different ages, from college students to senior citizens, stopping me and saying, "Officer, we're behind you. God bless you. We understand some of what you're going through, and we're behind you." And I said, "Wow," and we're all saying, "Wow." But there's always a segment that are not happy with us.
Now
But
that's
overall, I think we're projecting a good image.
Well, Officer Sabota, we thank you for your service and what you do every day, and appreciate you being here on this panel. And now we are a little bit behind in letting people go. If you don't mind, and I was going to come to Eric last, but I think I'm going to hand it to him because he looks like he's at his destination, and then we'll round it out with you, Chief Balling. So if President Eric, if you have any last words for us.
Thank you very much. And I believe the mere fact that we are speaking and communicating is so important. But again, I want to emphasize that policing is a noble profession. Our police officers, they have two authorities that even the President of the United States is not in possession of: the right to take away liberty and the right to take a life. That is in our Constitution. And with that noble profession, I think all officers should understand that political times would change, the climate would change, there would be conservatives and liberal policymakers and decision makers. But when you put on that uniform and put on that shield and put that gun on your side, you are immune to all the political winds and the political changes. You do not have the luxury to be angry, to feel as though you're going to not do your job because you're upset with the law that was passed. I was upset many times as a police officer because of a bill, law, policymakers that never patrol our streets made the decisions on us. But I knew the public should never be held hostage because of my anger of foolish policies. I don't like some of the policies that are being passed now in our state houses and our civil city councils. But the reality is the public must be protected. Public safety is a prerequisite to prosperity. And whenever your anger reaches the point that you could no longer protect the public, then this is not the occupation for you. You should find another occupation.
Absolutely. 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 Well, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your service. So happy to have you today, and really do appreciate those words. And if I was in New York, I would vote for you too. Thank you. Thank you. All right, Chief, let's round it on out. What are your words for us?
I'd just like to thank everybody here on the panel and everybody online. The health and wellness of officers have to also be taken into consideration. You guys do a very dangerous job. Everybody's listening to this does a very dangerous job. It's taking the toll on the mental health, the wellness of officers. Officers are actually dying 21 years earlier than the average citizen. And I think we need to address that, because the better physical shape we're in, the better mental shape we're in, the better we can serve our community. The National Law Enforcement Memoriam talks about that with Destination Zero programs and other programs. We have to take care of the people that are taking care of the citizens and move forward on this. And having these discussions and having these solutions come up will help us in this field. So thank everybody for being on this line and having these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
And Ganesha, thank you very much for moderating this panel. And I'd like to thank all of our incredible panelists. We appreciate your participation in today's discussion. The National Law Enforcement Memorial Museum has become the nation's gathering place for the important conversations and partnerships and ideas that bring law enforcement and communities they serve together. And today's program is a good example of that, because it is here at this museum where our greatest thought leaders in law enforcement, civic responsibility, and social change come together to engage in solution-based discussions. So join us on September 30th for our next event, which is being held in collaboration with Thomson Reuters Institute. The program, Technology, Training, and New Policing Guidelines in America, will highlight perspectives from prominent industry leaders and observers on the future of policing in America. So thank you to our sponsor, Target, and we will see you in a few weeks.
Thanks for listening to this revisit of the Encore series, where we took a look back at equitable policing during the coronavirus pandemic. We thank you for your support, and remember, our upcoming episode releases are every Wednesday, and published exclusively on Tuesdays is our monthly Icons episode. We hope you learned something from this episode, and will join us next time for another edition of Encore, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. A special thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Encore, a series from the Precinct 444 podcast network by the National Law Enforcement Museum. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.